folks, I'm L.A. Little, and this is your weekly TA Wrap. Well, we take a look at these markets every week from a neoclassical perspective, each time asking ourselves what happened last week and what might it tell us about the coming ones. I do a show once a week, every Sunday night, live at 9 o'clock Eastern Time, here from the base of what is a most gorgeous day in the Rocky Mountains. Folks, I'm glad you could take a little time to join me here. As you know, you can email me, TAT, or actually at support@tatoday.com. If you have questions that you want me to cover, you can also text me, 303-912-9110. And, of course, you can jot it in like I see Tommy already has, and I appreciate that. Let's get started. What happened last week? If we look at the ending numbers, NASDAQ up a little more than 1%. Dow, S&P's about 1% each. Russell 2K 0.5% higher. So you can see there that it wasn't as if like we were like burning up the place, but gradual move higher again. If we go look at the S&P, and being the weekly show, we tend to try to look at the weekly S&P and see how that's trading. You can see here the S&P 500 coming back at these highs. 175 there, you're hitting it with 180. That top's got 163 on it. Doesn't look bad, right? On a weekly basis, S&P looking pretty good. On the daily basis, still having trouble in the same area, and that same area is this range that we've talked about ad infinitum. You got swing point high here with a lot of volume on it, stuck there. You've tested it multiple times before, you're testing it again. Doesn't want to give it up, but at the same time, every time you come up there, the buyers seem to dry up, and eventually, at least previously, each time we've come up there, we've rolled back over, right, back down, and one has to wonder if that's what we're going to do again. So here we are at the top again. Now I know, and I've seen others in other forums, right, and I don't really watch the head and shoulder stuff that much, but I've seen others try to talk about this being a left shoulder, a head up here, and some sort of a right shoulder on this side. Yeah, I mean, that could be the case. Again, I don't try to pay that much attention to it. Now, a lot of people like the diamond pattern at the highs, you know, and I've seen this before, you know, where there's some sort of a diamond pattern taking place. You know, I don't know that I can buy that one either. I mean, maybe it is. It's kind of an odd looking one. Maybe if you bring it in on a different time frame or something. But I've seen references to those in other places. That's all the classical stuff. I don't pay that much attention to it. What I really care about here is, do I see more buyers at higher prices or not? And I look for that at particular points where supply should be felt, demand should be felt, and that's right here. You can see it in that resistance zone that the TA Today charts are drawn for you. And what do you see? Every time you come up there, right, we don't have buyers at higher prices. The only time we did was the breakout here, which quickly failed, big volume, escalation back the other way. So when it comes down to the S&P proving itself, the only way it proves itself to me is it gets over this high, keeps going. And I think that's going to be very hard to do. If we look at the Dow, you know, the Dow Jones set up basically the same way. Now, S&P, I didn't draw it out, but you could draw it out. You can do it here on the Dow as well. You know, there is the potential for some sort of a nice ABCD structure to the north. And at this point, it would be back to here. So a nice big ABCD structure going on here. That structure already is taking place on the daily chart. So that high of the B point, 16,565, we've traded over it. We're still hovering right there. It really wouldn't be violated until we came back quite a bit deeper still. But what is it doing? It's going into, you know, you can draw the same sort of thing. It's a little bit different here, but you've got a big range. It's inside that range. Nothing's changed. That's your two strongest ones. If you walk over to the weak ones, and we'll go to the Russell first, the Russell itself on a weekly basis really has shown us nothing but failures. And it showed it again this past week. If you take and you draw off that hammer low, high volume low, right, as it came back up, we've tried to get over it. We did get over it here on another hammer, but we quickly gave it up the next week, and this week we tried to get over it. We had some pretty good volume this week, but still that volume is less. 1.8 going into 2 is not quite enough. It doesn't look like it's going to fly, and it looks like it's going to try to come back. To me, that's a failure. Again, that's 2 weeks now, failed to get over that area. If we look at it on the daily, it looks a little bit different in that you get the hammer here, you're over it, but each time you come up, you keep failing on price, right, to get higher into the zone. And so that resistance zone where the buyers should disappear continues to be exactly where the buyers are disappearing. And we're talking about this. That's the bottom of it. You can see the blue bar that's giving you the range. That blue bar is the bottom of that. And then we've got the other one up here. That zone is deadly, and each time we come up there, we get no new buyers, no net new buyers, I should say, and we get turned back. So Russell still looks like it's doing the same thing. Now the NDX with Apple, having all the juice over the last, I guess, week and a half now, the NDX got a pretty nice push off the bottom. Apple contributed about 13%. It's about 23% of the weighting. But just like on the Russell, if I look at it on the weekly, this looks more like it's trying to set up an ABCD structure to the downside than to the upside. Each time it comes up, it also seems to be failing at key resistance. You can see it here on the weekly. That's the April 7th week. You're doing 113, almost 114 there. You're coming back into it with 104. Volume did pick up, but as it got above that price point, 3602, gets over it, back underneath it, fails, and on Friday in particular, that's exactly what happened, right? It was trying to go up here, trying to get over it, couldn't, sells off, still looks like it's trying to fail to me. And what we're measuring against here is the breakdown bar. So the big breakdown bar is kind of a key area. If this is going to get up to the next breakdown bar, the next resistance zone, what it has to do is get over this and then start lagging on up there. And so far it hasn't shown that it's able to do that. Now it does have two nice hammer reversals so far. And if this thing can get over this and stay over it, well, it might be a totally different picture, because in that particular case, you got multiple swing points you're trying to break. That would take and shoot you probably up there. That's kind of a key area. We'll see if it can get over it. Right now, it still hasn't shown us that it can. And the broad composite looks about the same. Really not much difference here. You got the same characteristics. It couldn't even get to that high. If you put it on the daily, it has the same sort of characteristics here, and as you can see, it's weaker. It can't even get there. And again, you're getting a lot of push this last week with folks that had rotated out of high flyers, rotated out of big cap tech, starting to rotate back into it. Will that continue? Will the money keep coming back in? I don't know the answer to that, but so far these charts don't seem to suggest that's going to happen. And one of the other reasons I say that is if I walk over and take a look at the sectors, right, the sectors aren't showing me anything to suggest that they're going to go higher on a daily basis. We'll just flip through them on the weeklies as well. Here's the IYT pushing higher, hanging up the highs, no volume up there. If we look at the semiconductors through the SMH lens, you can see that it couldn't move last week. This one had a big spike bar at the bottom. We tested it on a weekly basis. That says it can try to push higher. If we look at it here, you can see how it tested there. A little bit lighter volume on that test. That's good. If we go to the broader SOX, which isn't quite as heavily weighted towards Intel and weighted towards Texas Instruments, the SOX looks a little bit different in the volume characteristics, but it had that same characteristic here as it came down to test. Very weak bounce, absolutely no volume on the way back up. So those two indexes, or those two sectors, one of them looking pretty good, the other one just looks like it's stalemated. The basic materials just hanging there in a range. And you can see this range, and as these ranges develop, right, it becomes key that, you know, one side or the other breaks out. And right now they're just range trades, and they're range trades for about 8 to 10 weeks already, and they continue to go sideways. If you look at this on a daily basis, it looks about the same. You had volume pushed down, nothing on the way back up. Looks to me like it's about ready to fail. XLE has been one of the strongest ones. Here's the XLE on the weekly. You can see a nice big push up again. It did go over, had a little bit more volume on the weekly, so that still looks okay, and it's hanging up here. Can't get higher. It looks like to me like it's about done. ABCD structure that it was in place is done, but it's not a negative, it's still a positive. If you go to some of the others, and we'll go to the financials next, you know, the financials fell at that same key area. You know, we're talking about that breakdown bar. Well, you've got the financials failing at that breakdown bar as well. So you've got this range here at this lower level, and you got it at the higher level. So, you know, from the daily perspective, the financials don't look like they're going anywhere. If we look over on the weekly, you can see it fails on that big bar. That looks like a failure, right? You're trying to get over it. That's a different view of the same concept. 22.16 was the high. You got over it, 22.19, back underneath it. Don't have nearly the volume. That says this one wants to come back in, both on a daily and a weekly. And that's true not only here, but it's true on the XLV, the XLY, on the XLK. So you've got 4 major sectors all looking as if they're trying to fail. That makes it very hard for this market to go up. That's sectors, and that is one of the main reasons it doesn't look to me like this market's going to get over the highs and keep going. And even if it does get over the highs, I doubt it's going to have much of an ability to keep going. If we go over and look at the TLT, which is the bonds themselves, again, on a weekly basis, they look great, right? They're getting up there to where they're about to finish off ABCD structures. So you had a nice push up on a weekly, pull back, right? And now a continuation push. The target is this high. That's the breakdown bar. That's where it's trying to get. So we're not that far away. You see volume escalation as we're going up there. Looks to me like we're going to hit that area, right? And that's probably where we're going to find these things take a break finally. That's the good news for the market. It's just that if you look at it on a daily perspective, right, that good news doesn't look so good, in that this thing is really escalating on the way up, right, as it's going after another ABCD structure. It just finished off this small one. It has a larger one that it was working on here, and that one's got a little bit farther to go, and that would take it up into that area that it's trying to get to. So TLT still looks like it's going to push a little bit more. That should put a little pressure on the market still at this point in time. And then if we walk over and look at the gold market, and I did mention gold on Thursday's night show. I talked about gold looked like it was going to try to flip around. You can see it was testing here on the weekly, 37. The week before was 32. The week back here was 34. But the big guy was over here is 46.4. That low is 122.72. We did trade 122.72 pre-market twice, and it held. And you know, I'm not trying to count that just as much as to point it out. But if we look at it on the daily, you can see a nice escalation on Friday with some volume. That looks to me like it is going to test into that resistance and try to get over it. So we'll see if gold can actually make that push, because there's a gap here, and that's going to be the next big hurdle, is can it get back over this little gap area. If it can, you know, all these big bars don't mean anything until they get tested again, and so that's really going to be back up in these areas. So we'll see if it looks to me like gold's going to try to get over this and into these, and we'll see how it behaves. But a nice big push here with some decent volume on Friday. And that was true of the silver market as well. Silver also tried to push up, and we can see it here on the weekly. Now silver was trying to break down again, 49 going into 61, it doesn't have the volume, right? It's testing, doesn't have it. And if you look at it on the daily, big push down, back underneath it. We talked about this Thursday, back underneath it and over it, right? Which was a key indicator that made me think these markets were going to try to flip around, and then silver gets a big spike up. Now, with the markets being negative, right, you always have to think to yourself, okay, is this just short covering or is it something more? You don't always know that until the next bar. You get a little sign of that here and that it's sold off at the end of the day. But if this thing shoots on up here tomorrow or even comes back up, sometime this week to test these highs, then that tells you it wasn't just a short covering, or there's a heck of a lot of shorts and a heck of a lot of covering, right? Because usually a short covering within a bar or two will fold back over and they'll just simply take it all right back. So that will be the key going in tomorrow, the next day. So that's in a nutshell, kind of the big picture domestic. If we look at the international markets, it's slightly different in that most of those markets are still holding up. I'm not going to go through them all because I've got several questions here from Tommy and 3 more that were emailed to me this weekend, so I need to try to cover those. Let me pop over here real quick though. If we look, and I'll do a couple of Europe first. If we look at the CACs, for example, the CACs still hanging at the highs. The DAX doing the same thing, but these look like failure bars if I've ever seen them on the weekly. That's on the CACs. If I look at the DAX is up there testing as well, and the DAX finally made that run up to that high. It's into that resistance zone. You can see the volume just fading away from this. There's some markets doing really well. If I look at the Toronto Exchange, for example, my friends up in Canada, this market is on a nice spike higher, and so Canada looking pretty good. But then you got other things like Hong Kong and Japan and China, Shanghai, that are having troubles. Nice push up, coming back not with much volume, but it's got to find itself here pretty soon. Otherwise, it's going to come all the way back regardless of that volume spike. And this could have been nothing more than short covering. We were talking about the short covering just a second ago. If I look at Japan in a world of hurt, I think what's going to happen in Japan before this is all done is you're going to see it test these lows, break out these lows, and then you're going to see somewhere as this thing fades back in, you're going to see somewhere where the big boys over in China and the central bank decide that they're going to have to step up and do something, but they're going to see this thing destroyed first. Not destroyed, but really sell off first. ABCD structure is going to be big on the downside. If it takes hold, that will be if it breaks this area. And I suspect at some point here over the next few months it's going to. All right, let's take the questions that were emailed first, and then I'll pop back over and take those that are on the boards, anything else that may arrive. So I had 2 questions from one gentleman, Chang, asking me about Amgen and about WPRT. So let's take those in order. Let me get those charts up. So the question is, could I please comment on Amgen? Is it worth holding on the midterm, so on the intermediate term time frame? So Amgen, as we all know, big biotech, one of the more mature of the biotechs. It's made a nice big run. It comes off with some pretty good volume on the way down. Gets a hammer reversal on the weekly, and it does it as it comes into this big bar. This big bar top was 114.95. Closes inside of it, so that's a negative, so it has to get back over it. The other piece of this is now the question is on a weekly basis, are you going to retest and regenerate lower or not? So I think what you're going to see here is you're going to see this, and it's a pretty good widely held stock. So I think what you're going to see is you're going to see this thing hammer reversal, try to work its way back up over the next few weeks. 2, 3, 4 weeks, I don't know how long. Try to get back up here and test. That will be a full retest, regen if it does that. And then we'll see, if it can get over it or not. Now note, it's already done it on this bar, so it doesn't have to do it again. It's just that this bar had a lot of volume on it, which suggests that it's going to try to do it again. So I would, now that you got the hammer too, I would think that Amgen is going to try to make that work, that move back up there towards that 120 number one more time, and that will be the key test as to whether it breaks down or heads higher. Up here, we've had the retest. Nothing special here. ABCD structures down, didn't complete. Got a hammer reversal here as well, and that one, again, looks the same to me. It looks like it wants to bounce. On a daily, 116.45. So if you get over that 116.45, then you can get back up into that 120 number, which again corresponds to the full retest regen over here again. So Amgen, I think you have to watch it and see how it trades, if it can get back over 115 and then back into 120. If it can't hold it, then I probably would lighten up and I would look at it again a little bit later. I think it's great longer term, but if you're trying to make certain you don't lose your money, you want to try to time that and do some at least some profit taking, and then look to get in lower again. Westport Innovations. Westport, these guys, they provide a low emission engine and fuel system. So they basically are refitting and providing the hardware to refit various lightweight trucks and so forth to use natural gas. And steady, this is on the weekly, a steady sell-off. Was trading at about 34 bucks, went all the way down to what, 13 or something, and now they get a big spike up. This was on earnings. The earnings came in pretty good compared to what was expected. They had revenue climb about 39%. They still don't make money, so that's a negative, but a huge spike up here if you look at it on the daily. So the question here is strategy for the short and the mid-term. I was taking a quick look at this before we came on. If I pop over and go to the trading cube on this guy and put WPRT in to try to look at what these numbers look like, and that was, I can see here they don't have, they don't have the revs, so the revenue is 164 million in the million, so 164 million, but their earnings growth, there's nothing there because they're still not making money even though they have revenues. The revenue growth, though, was good, 31% that we were just talking about. The big thing to notice, short interest, almost 20%. So huge short interest in this particular stock. And so the question then in my mind is this nothing more than a short covering rally? So if I'm, and you got huge volume, right? So if I'm in this already, if I happen to have bought this down here for whatever reason, I want to watch this real close as it comes back up the next day or two and see how it trades into those areas where we should see some sort of resistance. Now keep in mind, this has transitioned. It's not a bearish trend anymore on this time frame. Matter of fact, it shows as bullish because it broke multiple swing points on the way up. But you got such a huge move that move's already done. I mean, it's already happened. The retest regen would be the more interesting piece, and it's just slightly over that. So again, I want to see if this thing fades back in and how hard it fades back in if it does. If it doesn't fade in hard, then that tells you that this isn't just short covering. It's actually some new buying. In other words, if this starts to fade back in and the buyers come in and we get another push, right, that tells you it's not just short covering. Right now, you don't know that. And so if I'm trading this, I'm long this, I want to watch it really carefully and I want to take some profits in here on the short-term basis. Okay, so that's the way I'd be looking at it on a short-term basis. And if it pulls back, right, into the swing point high, because the same concept applies up and down. So the first test is going to be the retest regen off that break of the highest swing point high. I want to see it hold this bottom. If it doesn't hold that bottom, I want to forget it. If it does, then it can try to regenerate higher. I suspect what you're going to see is that this is going to be some sort of a range trade, And maybe that range will be as far as this, right? So you may see a range trade that's as big as that, right? Or you may see a range trade that's smaller, which is actually this bar. And so that will be the question, is can it push up again? And that will have depend a lot on what that retest region looks like as it fades back in at some point. Looking at it on a weekly, you know, you got a big spike up. There's really nothing here until you get up to the 1950. So that low of this big high. You got some volume here, it's decent, but it's coming up with good volume. So anywhere from about 17, 18 up to about 19 and a half, going back to the daily, that's going to be these areas, right? These swing point highs. So I suspect on a longer term basis, I really wouldn't think about it all that hard yet. But I think that you can start looking at the short term now, especially on a retest region that holds. Okay, that's that one. And then I had another quick one from Mr. Barnes asking me about DGI. DGI he asked me about before. I said, hey, these guys got crushed. Let's let them, let's let them play out for a while. They reported earnings, got a nice pipe up, but you can see the big bar down a lot more than the big bar up. Wide price spread though, and it's had wide price spread here for a while. That's on the weekly. Here's the daily, nice wide price spread, not much volume comparatively, but it is decent volume come back into these highs. Highs got 1 million on it here, 2.4 there, you did 2.3 here. That tells me that at this point, this looks like it's finally starting to tell us that it's got a range. The initial range is going to be here. So now we know at least where to look, right? If I start seeing it trade back up here, right, then it's probably going to go all the way back up here, and I suspect at some point it will. What I'm more interested in is how does it hold this bar now that it's made it, and how does it look when it fades back into this area if it does, because that's where you want to try to buy it now, right? So that's where you're looking on the buy, this low, right, and that low. So now you got a spot to look, right? You buy it in here to start with, you buy it down here again. If it fades under it, well, you're wrong, right? But now you've got something to work with, and I think that was the question, and that's the answer. DBA, how does that look now? I don't know. Let's see what it looks like. And I did a video on this, and I was talking about a breakout that was trying to happen. Here's the weekly. More volume as it pushes higher on the weekly, so that's a good sign. Let's go look at the daily. And you got the nice push up, fades back in, so it's doing a retest regen again. And the second time doesn't have as good of probabilities as the first time. So it still looks okay, but you got to watch it. That low is 28.75. This low down here, 28.81. So I think you still got to watch that. That's kind of the key area to me. You don't want to see it fade underneath there very much at all. So it still looks okay, but you just got to watch it. The other question real quick before I run out of time, EEM. Let's see, would you choose one country ETF rather than an EEM right now? Well, yeah, I think so. If you look at the EEM, let's get the symbol in right. It's not, it's not bad, but it's fading back in a little bit. It's a big wide range. It tested that bottom, held it. Yeah, it looks okay. The one that really looks good right now is Brazil, EWZ. Brazil went back up with some nice volume escalation and took out, or is trying to test that high. If it breaks over the high, I'd probably be looking here for a continuation move. If it doesn't, yeah, then the EEM probably is the broader. EEM is going to be safer because it's broader, but this one is the one that looks the best right now. All right, folks, I'm a little over time here. I got to cut it off. Thanks for joining me. I think this week, key week, and I'm talking about that from a daily perspective. This market hanging at the highs again. You got maybe another day or two here. If you can't break over them, you're going to roll right back over and go back down the other way. Have a great night. Have a great week. I'll see you here tomorrow. Take care of yourself. And until then, I'm LA, and this is, and it was, your weekly TA wrap. Have a great week. Take care. Good night, folks.